Welcome to Frame Rate. That's the sound you hear. That's the sound of a frame rate incoming. And guess what? I'm Abe Epperson. I'm one of your co-hosts today, and I'm get to share the mic with my other co-host. Introduce yourself.
Michael Swaim, and we rate frames.
Yeah, we're big frame raters. And guess what? We're talking about. This is gonna be like a more philosophical discussion. If you recognize the name, yeah. If you recognize the name or the movie, you know what's coming. We have a guest that we always bring in specifically for the Charlie Kaufmans. Introduce yourself, guest.
Hello, my name's Brooks Brown. I make video games for a living, and I teach people about Deleuze for a hobby.
And you're our ad hoc
we think of you
Kaufman.
As you're our demolitions expert for Kaufman. We just are like, oh, okay, well, Brooks, obviously. If a Kaufman comes around the Rolodex.
We had such a good time the first time. We just
made it a thing.
Let's bring it around again.
Yeah.
It's a thing. Honestly, given the circles of people you walk in, I'm incredibly happy to be able to say that I'm the Kaufman person.
You're our go-to Kaufman.
Yeah. No, fascinating. So yeah, you read it. We're talking about adaptation today. How we usually, the way we jump right into these things, and I feel like in the interest of just doing it, we should. Let's get past the phase where we usually ask the guest to give like a short description of the movie. Now, it's always laughable when this comes up with these particular episodes because there's not always an easy summation of the events of the film.
John Malkovich
everything is
contextual,
contextual,
and even it is pretty wild.
Yeah. But if you can do your best, just kind of like announce what an adaptation is about, just for the sake of listeners who want to just follow along with the conversation.
I want to be a dick and just say, well, it's about flowers.
Right.
And then just kind of
stop. Story about flowers, man. Yeah. What do you think?
So Adaptation's the story of Charlie Kaufman taking on the work and doing the adaptation of a book called The Orchid Thief. The real story that happened. He got asked to do The Orchid Thief. And as he was trying to figure out how to turn this into actually a movie, he could not get past himself in order to do this. And spent a great deal of time battling himself on what it meant to actually do an adaptation, how he would tell his story, where his voice is, what the meaning of the thing is. And Adaptation is a film about the making of the script for the film Adaptation.
Absolutely.
Well said.
It is,
yeah.
It is both literally an adaptation, but also a work about what it is to adapt something. And the trifecta that blows me away, its resonant theme is also adaptation, as in evolutionary adaptation. So it was fucking Kaufman. Anyway. And
he had to adapt. Yeah,
reminiscent of.
We're going to talk about the themes.
I disagree.
Reminiscent of the story
I
behind.
also disagree.
We'll get into it in 1 second.
This is going to be good.
But I just wanted to say the trivia that, or at least it resonates with the story behind Synecdoche, which again, you would not really. I don't think upon viewing that you'd go, "Oh, it's a horror movie." But he was asked to write a horror movie, and he sat down and thought, "Well, what's horrifying to me?" And he came up with Synecdoche, New York. So.
Right.
This is the kid in class who takes the prompt and doesn't do
Trolls
the prompt the way you intended. Yeah, he loves to subvert the prompt and give you something else that's still brilliant.
Well, I would say specifically, though, this is, to me, and if you look through his entire oeuvre, this is the turning point of Kaufman learning to become Kaufman. To me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, do you want to, should we start by digging into that or digging into you disagreeing about evolution?
Name a point. This is not going to be an easy discussion.
I want to lead. I want to kind of go through it a little bit chronologically, not like through the story, but like my adaptation deal is with like the main story arc, because there's a lot of like, it's Kaufman, so there's a few things that are just for everybody that are just on the table. One, since it's a Charlie Kaufman script, it's about crippling insecurity and anxiety. There's a few things that kind of like are going on under the surface of the actual events of the screenplay, and then there's the events of the screenplay, and then there's the meta narrative. Like, we have so many different layerings that we can talk about the symbolism all day, and maybe we should a little bit, but when we talk about the overarching story of like what happens to the character Charlie Kaufman and Donald Kaufman, his, you know, fictional twin brother, and I think that kind of leads into adaptation. That will be more of like, what does the story mean? Which I think we should save till the end. So I think let's talk about this intro, right? I want to ask you guys a question. There's the introduction where we jump to, specifically the part where we jump to 40 billion and 40 years ago and the beginning of Hollywood. And he kind of has this framing device throughout that is basically saying like there's this there's this whole like cosmic arc that's happening simultaneously to our protagonist's story, right? It's talking about something larger. I want to tell me your guys' thoughts about what do you think that's about, and why do you think he included it in the screenplay?
So for me, the entire cosmic arc, and specifically, you're referencing it's throughout, but that sort of blend
like
that
the
they
Charles
do.
Darwin stuff.
Yeah, the push for me, and it's a thing that specifically in his usage of the orchid and the bee that becomes kind of this running theme, is this idea of this element happens, and so we need to create meaning for it. We need to define why a thing is the way it is. And to do so, we tend to make things very determinate. Here is how things are. Here is how things work. Here is how things need to be. This does that. This does that.
Because of that. These are connected this way.
And as such, when what he's doing is, to me, saying, in that case, then where the story starts, billions of years ago, there was the Big Bang, because that's literally how every story starts there.
And every story ends with eventually they died. Like, sorry. To me, it's the idea that all art is connected to all art is connected to everything. So when he's sitting down to try and do, because his stated goal in the movie is to write something true and vibrant that's quote unquote like real art. And that is literally an impossible task, because what you kind of mean when you say that is you're sitting down to write something that encompasses the totality of meaning.
Right.
Which either doesn't exist or is incomprehensibly large, depending on your school of thought. So it's like,
well, if you start from the position he does, specifically the position he starts from, and he says it very early on, and I don't have an original thought in my head, is I think the exact phrase. And he continues to run with this idea that, again, and when he critiques his brother, we'll get into all of these things, but he continually comes back to, how do you ground it? How do you make this thing work? He's like yelling at everyone that these things have to make sense. There has to be growth, but it has to be like real life. What's the drive behind real life? And the shift that starts to happen for him is as he starts to find his own way to disconnect from that story. The idea of original thought, it's impossible not to just dive directly into the philosophy of things, but we're talking about kind of, if you believe that there is a determinate nature to original thought, that I have a series of thoughts in my head and eventually something's going to collide in a unique way that comes out, but it's fairly determinate, which is, again, the Darwin metaphor. Darwin believed that orchids, very specifically, and orchids are the center of this, formed as they do in order to attract bees. That's silly. Orchids don't have intelligence behind them. There's no reason that it happened, but there's these elements that sort of collectively come in emergent moments happen out of that. That's actually what we've now know more evolution comes out of. Charles Darwin's view of orchids is that determinate. The film is about Charlie learning the shift himself as he moves from the Darwin-esque sort of setup to being something that is a lot more emergent, secondary, and touches itself in its own way.
What do you mean by that? Like he gets out of dark, like, I don't understand the dichotomy you're setting up there.
Well, Cooper says this is probably my favorite line in the movie, and what I think is great about the film is, despite all this abstract metadata bullshit we can and will do, where you parse it on a structural level and all the nested layers, it's still a magnificent piece of writing, meaning you can still find lines where you're like, that line sings on its own without all the meta bullshit attached to it. That is just a truism written well. And I think one of the best ones in the movie is Chris Cooper saying that of bees and orchids, by simply doing what they're designed to do, something beautiful and magnificent happens.
Right.
He's talking about how all life on Earth is dependent on pollinating plants, and the bees don't know that. Those are key. Because obviously we're the bee, right? Humanity's the bee. And it's the only viable argument for the fact that life has any meaning. Like if you're lost in an existential swamp of life is meaningless, one of the only arguments that could reassure you that life does have meaning is, look at bees and orchids, man. They don't ever comprehend their meaning, and yet they're part of something beautiful and magnificent. Maybe you are too. There's nothing saying you aren't. Like, you can comfort yourself with that. That's a real thing. And I think that kind of emergent magnificence is different than saying orchids have a collective intelligence and try to look like bees so they can capture bees' interest.
Do you think that either of you guys think that Charlie Kaufman, well, I don't want to go to the
like scientists often say today, natural selection has no goal. It is an important credo these days that Darwin didn't necessarily understand fully.
The other important part here is the line when he's talking to his agent, because I think that there's actually a before the movie. What, I fucked her in the ass? No. When there's actually a before the story in this film, because before the story is the things happening around it. The nature of Being John Malkovich having come out, having been the hit that it was. Here I am with that same director. Like, these are the things that happen in this movie, but it's also the color of the film existing. And now it's expected that Charlie Kaufman does a Charlie Kaufman movie. And that's now defined by Being John Malkovich. And as such, he is now aiming at trying to find his flower. That's the thing I think that is the shift for me, is he stops moving and trying to find his flower, just like the woman Susan's trying to find the flower, the ghost flower, this obsession for that specific thing. But ultimately in this script, we see Charlie actually realize, and this is, again, just to read a section from the actual Orchid Thief book, because it's one of the amazing parts, is this is actually intended to be an adaptation of the story we see inside of it. And the woman who wrote the original piece...
Just let me pause you just for a second. I just want to give context for people who are not as in the weeds as we are. So yeah, we did talk about Susan Orlean writing a book, The Orchid Thief. What that is, she's like an investigative journalist, and she found out about this guy who is played by Chris Cooper in the film, John LaRoche. Having essentially this obsession with the ghost orchid, which is once again represented in the movie. And she just kind of talks about how interviewing and talking to him, there's just a summary of it is just like her, like one of those kind of tell-all books where it's just like, I deep dived here, and also let me give you some facts. They also use lines in the movie adaptation directly from Susan Orlean's book when they're quoting the book. So it's all very like, it isn't invented in the Hollywood sense of that, which is a usual distinction we don't have to make because almost everything in Hollywood is invented. But I think what you're talking about here is that Susan Orlean's obsession with the ghost orchid in this film mimics Kaufman, or the character of Kaufman's obsession with crafting the self-reflexive film. Like, they both fall in love with the symbol of it. In the case of the story within the story, Susan Orlean with LaRoche and Kaufman with Susan Orlean, and then they're disappointed with both. The Orchid, LaRoche, Susan, Adaptation. These are the four kind of levels of like someone who's looking at something that is seemingly unattainable, is restricted, has a conflict, and this is just basic narrative storytelling stuff. My character cannot get there for some reason. In the case of, Charlie Kaufman, it's anxiety. In the case of Susan Orlean, it's like fear for being found out. But for many reasons, they don't go after the thing that they truly want until they do, and when they do, they're disappointed, but then they walk away from that story with the results. So yeah, continue. I want you to read from it, but I just wanted to point out the fact that Susan Orlean also was totally against it because when she was when she was told about it and she actually read
she was horrified.
The screenplay.
It should be pointed out,
and she's talked about
explicitly because I don't. Yeah, so there's a point in the film at which we haven't said this. Susan Orlean, as played by Meryl Streep, falls in love with LaRoche, starts having an affair with him, starts chopping up the ghost orchids and snorting them as a drug, and like tries to have Charlie Kaufman murdered. So
and does kill his brother. Does kill his brother.
That is not what happens in the book The Orchid Thief, nor in real life. So that's the audacity of the adaptation.
Charlie Kaufman is essentially saying, I'm going to write a character of you like I write a character of myself because I'm doing that with everyone. Just display on page, like essentially I am a person who did these things even though we all know you didn't, because obviously you as a viewer are not going to be able to decipher the difference between, wait, is this really what the Orchid Thief is about? Is he just adapting it normally or not? That's what Kaufman wants you to think
make
about.
it one layer more complex, it becomes apparent, I think, as it unfolds, that Nick Cage, who plays Charlie Kaufman, has a twin brother, Donald, who sort of represents himself, a part of himself, if he were positive and optimistic as he is anxious and insecure. And the just the ways in which they fold into each other makes it pretty clear by the end, I would argue, that Donald at some point either profoundly influenced Charlie Kaufman or literally takes over writing the movie that you're watching. Because
we'll get into
the first half of the movie feels very Charlie, and the second half feels very Donald.
Feels very Donald, and we'll explain what that means. But I think enough context is set up just for the meta aspect, because I know that that's hard to translate on a podcast.
Brooks
I feel like we've done that. I want to snap back to Brooks and quote the segment you're talking about, and talk to us what you want to talk about that aspect.
Orchids have multiplied and diversified and become the biggest flowering plant family on Earth because each orchid species has made itself irresistible. Many species look so much like their favorite insects that the insect mistakes them for kin, and when it lands on the flower to visit, pollen sticks to its body. When the insect repeats the mistake on another orchid, the pollen from the first flower gets deposited on the stigma of the second. In other words, the orchid gets fertilized because it's smarter than the bug. Another orchid species imitates the shape of something that a pollinating insect likes to kill. Botanists call this pseudo-antagonism. Other species look like the mate of their pollinator, so the bug tries to mate with one orchid and then another, pseudo-copulation, and spreads pollen from flower to flower each hopeless time. No one knows whether orchids evolved to complement insects, or whether the orchids evolved first, or whether somehow these two life forms evolved simultaneously, which might explain how two totally different living things came to depend on each other. The specific excerpt that I think is really important because, to your point, she was horrified. Yeah. This woman was horrified the first time she read this script. Which,
to contrast, here's a line from Charlie from what he wrote about the same topic.
I know what one you're going to use.
Fuck you, lady. You're just a lonely old, desperate, pathetic drug addict.
Yeah. I knew you were going to go to that interaction.
And that's him describing Susan Orlean.
Yes.
I thought you were going to go with maybe her I just want to be a baby.
I just want to be a baby again, yeah.
But she says now, and it's, again, to go back to the idea of what is an adaptation.
The real Susan Orlean.
The real Susan Orlean now says.
It says now,
that it actually is about the same thing, that it's actually the real meaning of the book.
She did. She said, there's a quote that she has that it's like basically like, I went to Charlie Kaufman and was like, how did you know that you were seeing these things? Because I had like a divorce at the time, and there's an interview where she kind of talks about it. Like, obviously it's exaggerated, and I think it's that my belief is that Charlie Kaufman could read between the lines of like the way that she talks about LaRoche in the book. It's like you could conceive of a version where she just like fell in love with it.
She falls in love with his passion.
Obsession.
But it's specifically she loves LaRoche's ability to
a
see life
passion.
as meaningful, to have passion, to think something matters. Yeah.
And so Charlie Kaufman's like, that is beautiful. Maybe she's in love with that guy because that guy's got a perspective. And so he just wrote it in that way. And Susan Orlean basically was horrified, almost shut the movie down because they had to get her say so. Remember, this all started as a for about 5 or 6 years, this concept for a script had been thrown around. Not the Kaufman treatment, but rather just the
story
idea
of LaRoche using legal loopholes to steal orchids. Yeah.
And so Susan Orlean did not expect this. She expected like, oh, they're gonna dramatize my story.
I can't even imagine.
So
she reads it, and one of the first things he says as a critique, Charlie in the movie, written by Charlie outside of the movie, calls her writing New Yorker shit, which is completely accurate. Her meandering prose is really difficult to follow. It's that classic New Yorker thing, and I'm not a big fan of it myself, but like the fact that he's critical of the book during the adaptation of the book is like, I can't imagine how.
While in the screenplay, he's sitting there profusely sweating, hoping he'll get the job of adapting the screenplay that you're reading. It's so.
Oh, and those scenes
Charlie
are great.
Kaufman.
Tilda Swinton as that agent, sort of playing the role in between, who says to both of them, "It's welcome to Hollywood."
Word for word.
The critiques of Hollywood.
You're such a unique voice.
You have such a
Everything
unique
is
voice.
about cliche. Yeah. And ultimately, she said yes because, as she quotes, or as she like paraphrasing, she was like, "Then I was told everybody in the movie is a real person." Down to Brian Cox's character, Robert McKee, who's the screenwriter. Like everybody's playing themselves. Obviously, the writer wrote themselves into the thing. And she said that and bolded her to accept the job. I think also when you're told, like, because at this point they're like saying like Meryl Streep's going to play you.
And trust us, we read screenplays and this is brilliant. Yeah. I'm sure people were saying.
And she read it, so she knows what he's going for. Yeah. You know, I don't think she's oblivious to it. But it's not at all what was sought out to do with the project from jump, which I think is more to the Kaufman point of adaptation. My question to you guys is, I do want to talk about a lot of the specifics, but I want to get one big thing out of the way that's like been bothering me, and I want you guys to weigh in on it. And my basic question is simple: is like, what is he saying here with the actual like story? Like when you just say like, follow the Charlie Kaufman tale. Not taking out the meta stuff, but I'm just saying, like, the fact that his brother dies, you know, like, where he is at the beginning of the script versus where he is at the end. What do you think Charlie Kaufman, the actual writer, is, saying about the idea of struggling to find a new way to tell things that he himself and the character both like kind of strive for? Should Charlie Kaufman continue at the end of the film to like investigate the mind in the way that he does? Is he writing,
for example, he says,
American
I like this ending.
Screenplay?
It feels right. I like this. This is good. Is he right? Is that true?
Is he right? Yeah. Does he adapt? Does he change? And do you think that that's honest? Like,
I have a clear answer, but I think the guest should probably go first.
So to me, I would go with, I think it was Michael, you said earlier that the first half is kind of written by Charlie. The second half is written by Donald. I tend to go that way. There's a very clear moment in the film where it's clear Donald's now in the driver's seat in multiple ways, and is the one who's in control of the movement of the plot forward, whereas Charlie was never really in control, but at least he was the focus. As this happens, what we see all of the things that Donald likes, but also are intended to happen. He goes to the seminar, and the things said in the seminar are the 10 Commandments of what's his name, McKee's. The 10 Commandments of McKee's sort of story all tend to happen within this section, and they happen in what I would say is like the hackiest, shittiest way it could happen.
And they were foreshadowed by Charlie in the first act saying, I don't want to write a screenplay where they do drugs or someone gets shot, and like those things all then proceed to happen.
He lists all the cliches that he commits in the movie.
Yeah, they all happen because it's
Deus Ex Machina.
So it's a lot to say, but I would say the Charlie early on, the first half is the story Charlie wants to write, which is just about kind of the mundanity of the creative process and the difficulty from, I wish I had coffee, I'm sort of hungry, and he's done writing for the day. Like I've been there. I think all of us have been there in one way. Like everyone who's creative, this is the process. But as soon as Donald's in, it's fire, it's going, and it's that exciting thing the same way we saw sort of Donald on the computer versus the typewriter, firing off fast and quick and you know, all of that. And then it ends with Donald's death, and specifically in a way that is a big, you're not allowed to do this. Specifically, McKee goes out of his way to talk about not doing a Deus Ex Machina sort of
and
thing.
And then an alligator comes
An
and
alligator
saves them.
eats Chris Cooper and saving him,
And it just so happens that this is where Donald died. Like, everything that happens is all Deus Ex Machina, but it ends with a huge, I'm not doing this. This is not who I am. And the thing that makes me think that's the case is because the first time we hear Donald talk
Interesting.
is he says the sentence, Charlie, is that you? And after Donald dies, the first thing we hear his mother say is, Charlie, is that you? When he calls her. Doesn't say, hey, Donald, because there isn't one. Because they turn out to be the same person, because that's literally the hackiest thing he could have written, which I think is something even Charlie makes fun of.
And literally
earlier.
Donald is writing a screenplay about multiple personality, which he says, you can't do that, so hacky. And he says, how would you even shoot it? And he goes, I don't know, trick photography.
Which is the best line.
Which is literally what they're doing to Nick Cage to make this movie work.
Right.
Definitely Donald doesn't exist. It is Fight Club. I agree that Donald
And a beautiful
But I would
way
say
that
Donald
life-
not only doesn't exist, but Donald is Gondry, is all of these directors that he's worked with. I think it's a very direct reference to these people and the
your
setup
partner
that
in the
they've got.
process.
Yeah. It's the, because he's worked with Gondry. I think he had just finished another film with Gondry that was just horrifying. What was it called?
And Spike Jonze directed
And Spike
this.
Jonze.
Malkovich,
And these we'll call pop directors, he was not into a lot of that. And it's very clear the way that they set up and how they marginalize him in the film. It's how we felt how he was marginalized in the previous. But the guy who was cool, who's dating the makeup girl and all that, there's no way that's not a reference to previous directors that he's worked with, or the current director. Like, I see this as him saying, I need to find my voice. Charlie, is that you at the beginning? But at the end, it's a question of, is that you? It's him finding out who he is. That's kind of the underlying sort of thread of this for me. And the death of Donald is him basically as a giant, like, overall almost, fuck you, I'm doing the film you asked me to. Well, quite literally, because it opens with what's her name asking him, you can have him fall in love. LaRoche and Susan, just make him fall in love. Add that stuff because it's not in the book. She says that, Tilda Swinton's character. So, like, this is the movie you want. Fine, I'm giving you what you've asked for. And shit it out. I'm thinking back. One of the things when I was thinking about this, Mike, is an old sketch you were in that Daniel O'Brien did about James Cameron's Spider-Man.
God, there were so many sketches.
But it's the one. It's the one about James Cameron was paid to write a Spider-Man sketch, Spider-Man movie, and it's horrifying. And it's horrifying because they told him we need it tomorrow, and so he just kind of threw all the garbage in and just sent it off. And the ending of this is the Donald process for Charlie. It's where he gave up. It's where he did that. He's like, fine, here are the things you want. This is the stuff that sells. Here it is. And by the way, I'm going to end it by killing the person who wrote this and the person who's the driver, because I'm not doing this anymore. And I think if you look after this, I think it becomes a lot more clear that that's the case.
That's interesting. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, because so if I were to ask you straight up, what do you think Kaufman is saying about hope?
Hope
at the end of the film, but not like what is he saying in terms of like the story? Like, what does Charlie Kaufman believe about ending films with hope?
Incidentally, I noticed this time that the restaurant, I looked at the menu, is called LA Pasta Place, which I really like. The restaurant they eat at.
Charlie Kaufman's films always have, and especially the last series, most of them have kind of a weird malaise hope. It's not the very hopeful, happy, but instead there's a possibility of finding ourselves. That it's not even that we see him do such a thing, or even that there's closure. It's that the hope continues to live on sort of unto itself rather than towards a singular goal or target. So
he's not saying anything about hope.
No. This
He's
one
just
to me
saying it
isn't
exists.
hope. Yeah.
But he specifically says at one point, like, I don't want to write a film like the character. I don't want to write a film about hope where someone ends, like, people at the end, like, go on having learned things. But and then he ends the film with him saying, like, my brother Donald, taught me this, and I now know how to write a better screenplay because of it.
He ends by actually kissing the woman he's been dying to kiss and walking off
all
with
the
her.
All of his insecurities have been abetted.
Also he even, I think importantly, overcomes a writing hurdle because he realizes he's using way too much internal monologue and McKee would not approve, and then he goes, fuck it, I like it, who cares?
Do you think the author is being genuine about that, or he's just tying up loose ends because the story dictates that that's what you do as a good writer? Like, is this a truly great American screenplay, or is it not?
Yeah. Oh, well, I do think it's one of the great American screenplays, for sure. But doesn't that have to... I have an answer to your original question, So I think I look at it in a timeless sort of way. I think both halves of the film are accurate because there's 2 points that really come to mind that I think trigger this being my understanding of the film. One is the thing that Donald says when he's dying, which was, I loved Sarah, Charles. Beautiful. That was mine, that love. I owned it. No one had the right to take it away, not even Sarah. And he says, but she thought you were pathetic. And he says, that's her business, not mine. You are what you love, not what loves you. So good. And a crystallization of what we already knew, because it's what Susan Orlean's been talking about, is you want to live a life with passion. You want to care about something, because by caring about something, it seems to give you meaning. You want to be the bee. Like you want to be LaRoche. And LaRoche goes through phases like fuck fish, but at the same time, everyone wants that. And we live in an increasingly sort of existential world. And I think the base thing about existentialism is not that everything is meaningless, but that things are inherently meaningless, meaning you must work to impart them with meaning.
To impart them
in
with
and
meaning.
of themselves, they have no meaning. And so, but then I think it's very important that, or the other like twin moment that really gets me is McKee's speech, because the movie so well up to the point where Charlie goes and visits the McKee Story Workshop has made me agree with Charlie at least about mumblecore stream of consciousness being more real. Like, I am agreeing with him that Donald's full of shit, because he's presenting Donald as such a buffoon. And I'm like, you're right. I'm smart because I'm watching Adaptation, right? Blockbuster movies are bullshit. I'm like picking up what you're laying down, Charlie Kaufman. I'm riding your vibe. The first time I see this movie, because I don't know what I'm in for, I'm like, let's keep doing this mumblecore, insecure, anxiety-riddled thing. Let's go. Then halfway through the movie, he has a character who represents a real guy whose book is on my bookshelf, who writes basic shit about how to make it in Hollywood, like how to break in. Like the Dan, he's the earlier version of the Dan Harmon story circle. Younger people might know Dan Harmon's, but it's the same idea. Robert McKee's story. And he says, if you can't find meaning in life, there's something fucking wrong with you. Every day, like right now, someone's murdering someone's falling in love, losing love, having unrequited love, saving a family member by sacrificing themselves. Like, if you can't find meaning in life, why would I watch your fucking movie? Why would I give you 2 hours of my life to bum me out and say life has no meaning, you worthless piece of shit? Get out of the way. And he's also not wrong. That's true. And in that moment, I'm like, wow, shut my mouth. And thereby Charlie's. And I think what's important is that by the end, there's two things at the end. One is that Donald sort of sacrifices himself in order to synthesize, like he says, I learned this from my brother. So I think both are true. And I think Charlie Kaufman is also having his cake and eating it too, because he's proving he could do both. He's like, look, I could be Ingmar Bergman and write this really like grounded Clerksian bullshit. I could also totally do the blockbuster version. And I'm not even saying one is better than the other. It's as simple as the final shot is filthy LA streets, and then you pan down and there's flowers in the median growing, as if that's beautiful. And if you think about it for a second, you're like, that's a pretty trite visual metaphor, or it's really profound. And the truth is It's both at the same time. It's whatever you want it to be. It is both trite and profound. It was profound the first time someone thought of it, so it's still profound now. It's just trite through exposure. Like everything, I just think the movie boils down to everything is what you make of it. And ultimately, Charlie decides it's a time in his life. The time has come to make things meaningful. There are times in life where you make everything around you meaningless, and there's times where you bring the meaning back, and that's a function of you, not of the external circumstances.
I can't help but see, for me, I cannot help but attach this to Human Nature, which came out a year before, directed by Gondry, produced by Kaufman and Jones, and written by Kaufman. You don't like, if this should not be one we ever do on Frame Rate unless it's a roasting. It's horrible. It's not interesting. It insists upon itself, and it does literally Donald's thing. Like, it's why it's hard for me to divorce that. You have Being John Malkovich, which I think you could say, if we're going to have the two halves of this movie, the first half Charlie wrote John Malkovich. Like, not that the second half Charlie totally wrote Human Nature.
Human Nature. Okay.
It's not even a slight question. It ends with a murder in the forest after a bunch of people fuck each other and there's betrayals. Like, is it
a Tim Robbins movie?
It is.
Wow, and he's so great too. And it's that bad.
Oh,
God.
It's really bad. And it's this weird hyper cerebral ending. They even end with like an Occam quote that makes absolutely no sense in context of the film whatsoever. It's really
it's not
strange.
The Razor?
No.
If you're gonna go Occam, come on.
No, it doesn't even matter. Like,
it's fine. It's fine.
It's garbage. And to me, it's a very specific kind of garbage. It's Donald garbage. Because it has all of these extra things that were added in that are fairly extraneous, that aren't really necessary to the plot. And there is a closure or a moment at the end, a denouement, I think, is how Daniel.
Yeah, the mispronounce. Yeah,
they have
like
the
it's not pronounced that way.
Yeah. It's very super tropey, and so it feels like, since this was being written alongside those others, because it was, we're talking about kind of this shift he was experiencing, and in the movie he talks about, hey, early Charlie, and then written by Daniel, and then Donald, and then at the end, Donald fucking dies, and Charlie has to figure out who he is, but he goes on to do, a few other films that I would say are less the Donald from here. That'd be
Eternal Sunshine.
I mean, he doesn't do anything else that has the violence and sex again.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I mean, he does that. And I think he feels more emboldened as he gets more successful to make things like Synecdoche and Anomalisa, just because he's now in directorial chair and controlling. Yeah. I have a different interpretation. I do agree with Mike. I do agree with yours in the sense that I think that that's what he's saying with that moment. I think that's the most generous you can give him at that. But I think that I don't think Kaufman slips here. But I think that Kaufman. One of my problems with a lot of his other films, I don't really have it with this film because I think he addresses it head on, and I think that that's like the strongest thing you can do as a writer is really address, like, all right, if we're going to talk about your insecurities for real, finally, Charlie Kaufman, because that's all I wanted to talk to you about since I've seen you making your films, is like, why do you think you're that way then? Why do you think that is a problem? Why do you think that is, you are a victim? These are questions now that I have. And it's the nature of the self-reflexive types of films that he makes and writes, or what you were kind of calling the mumblecore, which is more of like an examination of like the result of like what he wants to talk about. And I think there's a crucial moment that we kind of referenced earlier, which is that twice in the screenplays, there's someone who like kind of gives up on something that they actually were obsessed with, or that was like their reason for living. Like, I think for Kaufman, the writer, like in here, LaRoche is saying fuck fish, or Susan's I'm done with orchid flowers, is saying that he's done with the search for the great American movie script or whatever,
or trying to find the perfect truth or whatever.
Like Kaufman, because he's making it like basically right out of reality. He sought out to create something that was what he's like, I want to grow as a writer. I want to do something simple. How amazing flowers are. Are they amazing? I don't know. I think they are. He doesn't know why he wants it to be grandiose and involve 4 billion and 40 years ago and Darwin and adaptation. He doesn't care about the story that he's adapting. He cares about this like egotistical devotion to him being great.
The idea of being art. A real artist.
Yeah, and he's a real artist, yeah. And that's what the movie is kind of telling me. Though you're right, Kaufman went on to make things like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and other films that I say consistently do the thing where he like writes himself into the narrative, which I think all writers do to some extent. So there's a lot of caveats flying around. But my main point being that I think that this is the only time I think in his entire career that Charlie Kaufman is standing at a precipice, and I think he fucks it. Like, I don't think that the movie fucks it. I think that the movie is totally right. He did the movie correctly.
Wait, is fucks bad?
I think that, yeah. If
oh,
yeah.
You meant like
I think Charlie Kaufman
fucks the crevice.
No, I think Charlie Kaufman as a human being, I think he might have an issue with this. I think that he still is writing movies that are egotistical and self-serving as opposed to true.
You think he's still trying too hard to be a real artist?
I think so, and I think that's his true insecurity.
Ideal of what that would mean, and fine.
Yeah, and this is the film that he addresses it, and that's why I love it so much.
I think I have that egotism, or I have that drive as well, because I like it the harder he goes. Like Adaptation, I do think is a masterpiece, but it's still not my favorite. My favorite's Synecdoche, because that's even a harder version.
Yeah, that's even harder
version of this. Yeah,
it is, because it's just like
it's so challenging. It's like fuck you, try and enjoy this. And I love it. And
the only real difference between, like, to me, the reason I'm drawing a parallel, and it, if you're humoring me, I think with the later films, it's just largely metaphorical. Philip Seymour Hoffman and Synecdoche is essentially Charlie Kaufman in Adaptation playing Charlie Kaufman. But this is the only time that he actually says, like, it's literally me.
Yeah.
It me. Yeah. Like, it's different, but his characters always are written from a point of view of, like, they have my insecurities. They have my issues with like the way the world works.
Next, we'll probably get to I'm thinking of ending things, but I think that one deters a little. I don't know if that's a stand-in for Charlie Kaufman, the Jesse Plemons character per se. Go ahead, Brooks.
All right. So for me, I would add, I have some disagreements there. I get what you're saying. Another underlying sort of thread throughout this is he's writing his own version of Flowers for Algernon. It's referenced a number of times. Is the story like Flowers for Algernon? That's a good story about, like, it's
about flowers.
It's a funny joke, but I mean, the main character of Flowers for Algernon is Charlie, who is dumb and can't fit in, and has his buddy who's great, Algernon. Eventually, they end up going out. Algernon starts falling apart, and Charlie doesn't want this world anymore, and he steps back from it. Hard not to draw some kind of, parallels there.
Yeah. I absolutely agree, because of, like, if you just bear it down to its leitmotif story wise, it's like these moving objects, and that is the heart of it. Like the two entities at the end, one leaving, one staying. It's much like in this film, the killing of the self by the killing of Donald Kaufman. I see those parallels.
Yeah.
And it's yeah, but it's like, once again, you have to I keep coming back with the question of, like, okay, so if we're doing this metaphor about the killing of the self, and you're killing the part of yourself that has so far in the story represented kind of like the dumber version, like you earlier in the film, Charlie says of Donald, like, I can't believe we come from the same DNA. Like, no, that's so stupid. And we laugh as the audience at his, just foibles. But, like, when it comes down to it, what does the killing of Donald do?
The killing of Donald stops, specifically, the killing of Donald stops there from being a satisfying ending, which is, like, one of the things that he makes fun of Donald for, that they make a big deal out of. And to me, if we talk about, like, Charlie Kaufman through his career, I think I made the comment that this traces back. Charlie's, like, first bit of writing that the world ever saw was an episode of Get a Life. If you haven't watched it, it's fucking amazing that it came out when it did. It's like the It launched a ton of careers. Chris Elliott, Bob Odenkirk was on it, and Kaufman
really
wrote
good.
a couple. And the episode Kaufman wrote specifically is the whole sitcom itself was crazy and a bit sort of intended to be like an anti-sitcom. But his episode ends with Chris Elliott gets taken hostage by a pen pal who he's in love with. He ends up getting shot a dozen times. His friend's wife gets arrested for the murders. And he says out loud, "I'm just glad everything wrapped up and ended up for the best." And then he dies on the ground of his bullet wounds. That's the first like public writing of Kaufman that like got produced as far as like the world knows. This mentality of trying to break out of those tropes and find his own voice has been something that is from the beginning. And here we are at this film where it is about Charlie. Hello, Charlie. Is that you? Is this you, Charlie? Who are like this question of who he is? And it ends with, again, the death, but instead of the denouement or these great moments that close it off and how it needs to have these grand moments, which is, again, to go back into McKee's commandments. Yeah. Instead, it's this open-ended, sort of deeply unsatisfying thing where he kind of ultimately synthesizes the two, because it ends with him having a kiss and he goes after the girl finally, but then please explain to me the flowers and everything else. Like there's an unsatisfaction at the end that I really think is becomes more or less Kaufman's sort of outstanding play through the rest of his films.
So you're saying that the ending was unsatisfying to you because it's an incomplete metaphor?
Because it didn't complete or add meaning to any of the things that happened. Everything is ultimately what? Just about him.
Yeah. So
like there's a million
in terms
loose
of
ends.
the denouement, the idea that it ends with hope, there's no justification for the hope.
Yeah. It doesn't drive back. Why is Charlie Kisser? One of the things that he keeps harping on Donald about, and we see happen a lot, is why is this happening in the world? And he again, Donald's answers are always fucking amazing. But when we write and you go, oh, I've got this great idea. What if this happens? Well, why is that? How does that work in your world? And you essentially have to like go in retrospect and change everything in the story in order to fit that. And that's kind of what we see happen over and over, especially the structure of how it's written. We hear where they need to get to, and then we watch in the script as they justify it. The Donald goes, oh, they're totally fucking. She's fucking LaRoche. She's having an affair. She's lying. And then we see them go and find justification for it when there isn't any in the real world. All of it's completely made up. From that moment on, it's all lies. Like, not that the movie's like filled with truth, but like as far as an actual adaptation or the literal story, that never happened. This never happened with LaRoche. They never came upon Indian tribesmen snorting green cocaine made from ghost lilies and then did it themselves. No. And like, it's wild. And it's from there, it's Donald's sort of bullshit trying to justify how this affair came to be. Because again, it shows after that in retrospect. We don't see it happen organically. So there's this constant process of, here is the thing that we need to have happen. Cool. Here's the stuff that justifies it over and over and over. But we never see that with Charlie and the kiss, because it's one of the things that happens the first.
It feels I guess I could agree that it feels unearned in that that's not what the story's about, but he does do work early saying that he is in love with her. He's very clearly in love with her, and she's very clearly in love with him.
Yeah. But so why? It's not, like why? But he didn't do it before. So what changed?
Why love? Like,
no. Why did he kiss her? Why did he say to her?
Oh, because I thought it was very clearly that he's accepting the message that his brother has. That love, you couldn't take it away from me. He wanted something that he couldn't be taken away from him. And part of that is trying to get over his insecurities. He's very self-aware in the movie of what his problems are, but he continuously goes down like the rabbit hole of like hating himself, and that self-loathing that kind of is feeded by his egotism, which feeds his self-loathing, which feeds his egotism. Like that he's breaking that cycle a little bit, and that's why I think Charlie Kaufman, the author, Like, I'm disappointed for a different reason, doesn't actually agree with that sentiment. Or rather, I mean, the real answer, and the answer that I like the best, is that Charlie Kaufman's over here going like, look, buddy, I need money and I need a life. I like cars. I like having a house. I'm good at writing this type of story, so I'm going to continue to write it. But if he were true to the word of my interpretation of this movie, he's not learning his own screenplay's lesson, but he's aware of it, which is fine. You know, I do think that this movie is a spectacular testament. I think he might have accomplished the best meta-narrative film ever created. And in that regard,
most complexly self-referential without falling apart, for sure. Yeah.
For sure, in the way that like only a screenplay about screenplays can be.
You know what's interesting is
F for Fake is pretty good though.
That's true. Yeah. I was watching this with my mom who'd never seen it, and her takeaway at the end was, I bet he's really good at chess. And I was like, I know what you mean. Yeah, it's very strategically deep.
Ahead of the...
Because when people who put together stories try to break a story for an episode of a show or a screenplay, like, we have strategies and we employ structural strategies. If you think of it that way as strategies, his strategies are like fractally complex. Yeah, he plays deep strategy.
Yeah, it's knots on knots on knots.
The amount of play and payoff will be like this scene here, it pays off in 7 different ways depending on which drama you're tracking at the time. Yeah.
And I think all three of us agree that the writing is also stellar.
Yes.
Like in terms of like the page to page, like the cleverness of the concepts are one thing, and that is writing.
And
but
the
I'm
jokes
also
are very
about,
funny.
Like,
and I'd say it's...
And structurally, he's all over the place in this one, but like I think we give him a pass because he's literally talking about that. But
the point is that he's all over the place.
Writing humans, he's good at writing like, oh, I believe that's a human. Mm-hmm. You know, I may like them or dislike them, but that is a very fully formed human character that, you know, Nicolas Cage plays really well.
Oh, it's also just a delight to see. Maybe Nicolas Cage's best roles.
Oh, I would easily say it's probably one of my favorites of his. Like, easily. Mm-hmm. He's so incredible in it as both brothers, and at no point does he like Nick Cage out. Like it's very reserved and pretty incredible. And
distinctive nuance between the two brothers, like very like, I mean, we're seeing a return to like a more the way I would approach it would, or like worksman-like or craftsman-like just doing the acting work. It's funny because as we're talking about this, there was recently on Twitter, Brian Cox had a whole, he was on Twitter.
Because he tore some other celebrities' new assholes or whatever.
Yeah, and it's because I think Brian Cox is up his ass a little bit. I think he's right, and I love this. I love it anytime anyone's like dragging other people, but like he's basically saying like, look, it's just acting, and you do the job and you do the work and you do what they teach you, and anything else is superfluous. And I think that if you look at the entire career of Nicolas Cage, he absolutely is that type of guy. He's just like, what's the project? Okay, I understand this project. I'm going to apply the thing that I think is the best thing for this. And that's all he does. He's actually, like, to me, that's what an actor should be. There shouldn't be any ego in it. It should just be like, I am a vessel. Use me. Oh, you like that I can scream really loud? I'm going to do a bunch of those movies. Why? Because money. Once again, it all comes back to just like, this is a job. But anyway, I do think that Kaufman is, I think we kind of do agree that there is a fundamental kind of hypocrisy about the ending of the film, despite the fact that it is perfect to be, if it's perfect that the ending be hypocritical is what is up to your interpretation. Like as the viewer, you take it or leave it, you like it or you don't. But he's definitely successful in my interpretation of trying to talk about himself as the writer and at the same time trying to tell the story and trying to adapt a work. I think he does both.
Well,
by the end, he's like, it's as if he started a big lofty speech about art and then said, but, you know, you got to eat or whatever. Like, do whatever you got to do. Fuck it. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
It's almost the nutshell of the emotional arc of the film.
Yeah. And I don't know if he's genuine is my problem, because he's trying to
believe
appeal
it's
to
genuine.
our honesty.
It seems consistent over the course of his career. It feels genuine to me.
Yeah.
It also, you just made me realize that I'm thinking of ending things would also be an adaptation of Flowers for Algernon if Charlie just didn't get the surgery. He's just a sad janitor the whole time.
Well,
I'm fascinated by that Flowers for Algernon connection, because that didn't fully occur to me, and now I'm like re-going over that and mining all the connections.
So
God, adaptation pays out.
Real question.
That does pay out.
Is there a Donald in this movie? And I mean that because it's one of the things that...
Are you bringing up like the identity thing, like the identity problem? Like, so also...
No, is it Fight Club? Is it Fight Club? That there is no Donald.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Like the movie in 2003, I think, Identity,
and
then there's another movie that also is called 3. It's on the Wikipedia. 2 films were created out of the thing that Kaufman in this script says, like, oh, that's trash, and only like a stereotypical Hollywood guy would like that. And like we literally see Ron Livingston going like, "This is awesome, dude." You know, like this is
Mom
awesome.
Called it emotionally taut.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, it was like in one case, it's even sadder because if you guys look into 3, someone wrote a book about it. Like they watched this movie, wrote a book about it, and then that got made into a screenplay. It's like life imitating art in a beautiful way.
Well, I mean, at this time, he was hired to write Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, which is far more mainstream as a thing.
Far more mainstream and doesn't have...
So if we're talking about like, well, he's writing this other thing is this trash. Is there, in this film, there is no Donald. It is all Charlie. And he's going back and forth and kind of oscillating these core personalities. And ultimately, again, the ending of the death, there never was a Donald in this world. The comment early on, how are you going to do it with trick photography? Yeah, well, how do you explain and he starts saying, well, they're at the set where Donald would be basically breaking the rules of the universe. He's making commentary on the fact that they're breaking the rules of the universe by having someone who doesn't exist.
Doesn't Donald come to a party with a girl, though?
Yeah, he gets calls and they're like, Catherine Keener's in my house. Like there's scenes where he's doing stuff outside of what is
he could
frankly
imagine Catherine
capable.
Keener on the other end of the phone.
Yeah, but
I could imagine.
You don't assume that that's.
I'd have to rewatch it, wondering.
I think
literally
I don't know.
Counting Fight Club rules. You know, like I'd have to watch it through that lens.
Yeah, I think it's fine, like mental masturbation, but it doesn't matter though. Like
no, because either way, Donald represents a facet of his
fictional.
personality.
Yeah, either way. But I do like that because I am going through the scenes in the movie and I'm thinking like, does he actually like, could that movie also be like, did Charlie Kaufman actually go out of his way to do that as well? And you might be right about that, but I don't know. It just seems like, it just seems not, like, I don't know. It just seems like it's not something that is super important in the narrative to me. In the way that the other metaphorical elements are. There's just stuff there's so much other stuff going on. But that's really funny.
We are really, really funny.
Oh, I wasn't talking about you. Sorry.
That's your first mistake.
Oh no. Yeah, what else? There's so much, but
I shot my hour-long mind wad.
Yeah, me too.
Let me know if people have big yearning passions that they have yet to unspool.
Oh, you know what's something that I thought was a really nice touch, just a small little thing, is that despite the fact that like LaRoche and Kaufman are like in thesis and antithesis in terms of like character studies, he both made them crippled by their insecurities. They're also both arrogant. They're confident that they're the best at what they do, and they tell everyone about it all the time. I love that Chris Cooper, who plays John LaRoche, comes in early and hot with some of his insecurities. When Susan Orlean, aka Meryl Streep, gets into his car for the first time, he says, "I want you to know that this van is a piece of shit. But once I hit the jackpot, I'm going to buy an awesome car." Like he's so...
Well,
he's so
the line he says that's amazing is, "I'm the smartest person I know." I'm the smartest person I've ever met. That's actually
That's right.
a line from his life. Like, that's a real line he says.
Right. But it's just so funny to me that Kaufman, the author, chose to make Kaufman, the character, and LaRoche so similar, even though they're so, like, their personalities are as different as it gets. They both have the same, like, flaws. And I thought that was interesting, considering how the relationship of, like, putting someone on a pedestal and admiring them, much akin to a flower, or looking down on someone later and being disappointed by them. Everyone's kind of fulfilling that role in the story. You know, even the concept of adaptation, you know, is a character there, because the people are, you know, dissatisfied with the adaptation. Like, that might be the greatest trick that Kaufman's playing here, is that by giving us an unsatisfying ending, he's also proving about the movie that if you're looking for something larger, there is nothing to be there other than what you make of it. And so what you make of it is things like, what if, you know, if you rewatch the movie, is there a Donald? Like, that might be what Kaufman has done for us, is made this podcast. Like, if he listens to this and he's like, yeah, these idiots.
Well, and it's one of the things he does with the drug specifically, which I think a lot of this film, as I was rewatching it, kept calling me back to, I don't know if you ever saw Rubber, which is
The Killer Tire.
Killer Tire. It's one of my favorite films, of course, because I like the stupid weird shit. But the core sort of setup when Quentin Dupieux made it was a response to what he was dealing with in Hollywood, and a big fuck you to kind of everyone in the space as he was making stuff and mocking the idea of the audience. And Rubber literally puts the audience in the theater, in the movie, and it just could not hate them more, like, could not have more sort of contempt for them. In this, as we start getting through Donald's world, specifically what the ghost orchid powder does, the drug, is it makes everyone find the most mundane garbage wonderful and fascinating.
Fascinating, yeah.
And I couldn't help but think that was also a sort of critique on, you know, just the nature of, hey, look, here's this, because the rest of the movie is, oh, we're going to follow him. Oh, we're peeping on him having sex. Oh, now they're going to murder him and they get eaten. Like, it's garbage. It's not interesting. There's but we're there and we're following it and we're into it. And
well, and especially because he kind of cheats, because even though the events are garbage, their lines that are coming out of their mouths are not garbage. They're good.
Oh, they're
lines.
so good.
They're good lines. Yeah, I agree.
No, the writing is exceptional for it, but specifically, like, the arc is so pointless. What happens, and yet
quite intentionally so. Yeah.
Yeah, but everyone's got this drug.
Yeah, I can't think of a more like it's kind of ineffable, like, how good Meryl Streep is, because there's things that you can, like, go like, that was a good line reading, or you can go like, oh, that's a good instinct, but there's just something that, like, I can't explain, that is, like, her talking about the dial tone, like the whole sequence where she is,
when she lays on her back and looks at her feet, and the way her eyes are open wide was shockingly subtle, brilliant. Like, the
dial
amazing.
tones, admiring the ants, just that whole segment where it's just this simplistic rote love story.
She's incredible.
That, you know, like, she's like, I just
amazing.
remember that stuff. Like, when I think, like, it's just one of those performances that you just go like, that, I've never seen that before, and like, now it's locked in as like a trope. I don't know why she's capable of that kind of stuff, but she always is.
No, she's one of those actors who you go, oh, it's Meryl Streep. Like, she's just fucking wonderful.
Right. And it's just like, once again, cliches. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Water's wet. Yeah. At this point. Yeah.
But I also love that I can say that the subtleties of a Nick Cage performance, that you can say that during this, I think is kind of amazing too.
Yeah. Right. All right. Yeah.
Never liked Streep.
At the premiere of
I know. I can't even imagine someone actually harboring that opinion. That's why I said it almost to test it out loud. Yeah,
just to test it, and you're like, it didn't feel good as soon as I said it.
At the premiere of Mandy,
I bet she's got.
At the premiere of Mandy, Panos Cosmatos talked about Nick Cage. Someone asked, because Nick Cage was in Mandy, and he does a lot. We'll say there's a significant range of performances. But someone was like, how was it like working in, and Panos said, and I think it's pretty clear that's the case, that with the right director, Nick is ready to do kind of whatever it takes, and that he really just needs the right director. And Nick sitting next to him in the most god-awful gold spray-painted leather pants, it was amazing, said, no, it's very important to me that I be part, like, to him, it's the artistic process, and the way he was talking about it, it's about the director spending the time and about the ideas behind it. And I can only imagine what it was like on set with him with this. Like, genuinely, it's probably my favorite performance up until Pig. I don't know if you've seen Pig, but it's fucking amazing.
Yeah, I just saw Pig. I still think Adaptation beats it performance-wise. Raising Arizona also would be in the running. Of sets I want to be on.
Yeah, that's that. Once again, that workman like you just a cartoon. There's something about like disappearing into the role of cartoon.
I'll give you that, boss.
Where you're just like, I'll do that. Yeah, that I just love.
And then when Charlie Kaufman's like, you're pathetic, but in a grounded way that's realistic. Don't go full Nick Cage. He goes, okay.
Yeah, don't try to ploy for
Nick Cage
emotion.
Has admirable workman instincts.
He's very good.
Yes.
In fact, on Discord, he's Brooks's icon.
He is.
It's literal icon.
He is. When I was growing up, everyone said I looked like him. So
picture.
I went on Halloween. I went for a few different movies. It Could Happen to You. I dressed up as the cop with the lottery ticket.
Interesting.
It was an ongoing stupid joke.
Quite a Donald on our hands.
Would be easy.
Oh, yeah. That wasn't just a cash in at all.
No.
Hey, man, you got tax receipts you got to take care of.
You got to buy a big tomb in New Orleans. You heard about that?
Final thoughts? Yeah, you hear about this?
Nick Cage
is
going to be buried in a giant pyramid in New Orleans?
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Okay.
Tomb.
Just so people know.
Just so people know. We can all visit it later
The
and
Nick Cage
I don't know,
tomb.
do cool stuff. Like, I don't know, like
the Nick
sit
Cage
on it
pyramid.
and talk about whatever we want.
It's the only person on earth where you hear that and you go, yeah, okay, I buy that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
There's several peoples I can imagine having a tomb in New Orleans, but that just says more about me.
No, but specifically a giant pyramid. His is going to be a huge pyramid. 4 times the size of an average tomb.
Yeah.
Who else?
If you have money, you can do that.
I could
kind
see
of stuff.
Streep getting a Sphinx.
I could see Billy Bob Thornton literally doing the same thing as Nicolas Cage.
Yeah. He gets a slightly larger pyramid right next to it. I could see that.
There's a lot of people.
All right.
But any final thoughts on Adaptation? Anything?
I just want to say that I love this movie.
I love it too.
Yeah, I do love it too. I think that it's the one. I usually come down pretty hard on Kaufman personally because I don't like the style mostly. That it's usually style notes, which is, not exactly what he's going for. He's usually going for something that's deeper. And I sometimes find that he's self-aggrandizing and sophistic or cystic.
Solipsistic.
But solipsistic, yeah. But he this one, I think, because he addresses it so head on, it works for me. So that's my takeaway. Brooks, I want to thank you for engaging us in this wonderful conversation.
I'd love to. It's one of the interesting thing about this film, and it's the last time he did this, and maybe the only time, is it's to me the most accessible Kaufman, because I think it's the most successful in terms of trying to, a writer coming through a film. I don't think that's a thing that happens. I think writers get lost in the milieu of what a film is in the writing process. And as you guys were saying earlier, the meta of this is, to me, the most successful of any movie, in the way that I can recommend this to people who don't know Kaufman or aren't super into film, and they'll come out the other side just confused enough, but really like it, because it is genuinely a good film.
It's in the top 3, but I think
it's not for me. For me, it's not my top 3 Kaufman movies.
I mean accessibility wise for broad audiences. I think Eternal Sunshine's probably the broadest, because it's just breakups are sad and memory, sci-fi memory game. Everyone can relate to that.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's true. I think Jones has something on Gondry, but that's for a different
But I would say this one hits the balance. I think, again, I agree. Eternal Sunshine's way
This is
more.
the most accessible smart one.
it's the balance.
Yeah.
It's the pyramid.
Yeah.
Because if you go further on the other side of that sort of axis where you hit the, I'm thinking of ending things or Anomalisa, you have to be someone like, nothing against you. You have to be someone like me and Mike to like it.
You have to really want it.
We've already stepped through onto that and we're ready for it. But if you're not already there, it's not going to bring you over to the side. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to devalue the director. That's all. Yeah. Hey, man. Is there any place on the internet you want to point us to or plugs you want to make for yourself?
Yeah, if any of you want to learn more about a couple of things I mentioned, I brought up Deleuze lightly. I do want to just mention because it's one of the things I couldn't help.
I'm almost done. Just give me a few seconds, please.
In Thousand Plateaus and Anti-Oedipus, Deleuze and Guattari go significantly over this concept of the orchid and the wasp. This would be, if I have a final point, this would be it. They talk about the orchid and the wasp because when Darwin brought it up, or as it's discussed in the book from the quote, one of the difficulties about all of this is talking about which one is, we'll say, the primary. Is the wasp attaching itself to the orchid, or is the orchid attaching itself to the wasp? In doing so, we create a hierarchy and a setup that one is signifying the other. Their big point is that at any moment, as the wasp and the orchid pseudo-copulate, as the bee hits the flower, at any moment, the bee is becoming more like the wasp, but at the same time, the
Jen,
wasp
please,
is becoming
just
more
stop
like
fucking
the bee.
with it. Give me a second.
And in these moments, we actually get this moment where we have increased meaning, the growth of things, as the quote goes, a becoming wasp of the orchid and a becoming orchid of the wasp. There's neither imitation nor resemblance, only an explosion of two heterogeneous series on the line of light composed by this common reality. And I've always loved that phrasing, and it's one of the things that really, when I was going through this and when I watched this the first time, it's always been something that stuck with me. If you want to know more about Deleuze, if you want to know more about Guattari and the other writings, feel free to search the Deleuze and Guattari Quarantine Collective. We're on all kinds of podcasting, and we do a Discord reading group to teach everyone about the philosophies surrounding that. So thank you guys for having me on. It's always an amazing pleasure.
That's great,
it's
man.
one of my favorite highlights of my my week or my month when I do it.
Oh, that's spectacular.
Well,
thank you for being here.
we got to do Thinking of Ending Things soon.
Oh my God, yes.
I'd love that. And Abe can go back to shitting on the movie.
Yes.
Because I know he's not a fan of that one.
No, not at all.
Yeah, it's fine. Everything's fine.
But you
guys.
like Clemens.
We're just here. Yeah,
We'll take Clemens and make
that
Clemonade.
doesn't change the meaning of the movie, but whatever. This is fine. That's that podcast. You know what I mean?
Yep. We've made the mundane magnificent, and we've made the magnificent mundane again.
Thanks everybody for listening. Until next time, we've been the Frame Raiders.
Pew, 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 pew. This has been a Small Beans endeavor. We're a bunch of pals who make podcasts, sketches, music, web series, and movies. The beans always have new ideas percolating, so make sure to check us out at patreon.com/smallbeans. That's patreon.com/smallbeans, where you can browse all of our current and past content, see what we've got planned in the future, and learn how your support can help the small beans grow into huge, giant monster beans. If you enjoyed this content module, please like, rate, subscribe, or tell a friend about us. We love you!